Hello, hello. I am Coach Corey Sartori. I empower high achieving women to grow in their self love, confidence, and relationships for a more fulfilling personal life. I am excited to talk to you today about better communication, better relationships. And I know that because I have been working on my communication skills for many years, that my relationships are better because I communicate better. And so today we're going to talk about the why and the how. And I hope that you walk away from this with some valuable information that you will implement into your life to help you be a better communicator so you can have better relationships. So as you jump on, maybe grab a pen and paper so you can take notes. Because the information that I want to offer you today is valuable. And so I'm excited to share with you how to be a better communicator so you can have better relationships. And as we talk about this, know that I'm not just talking about romantic relationships. I'm talking about all your relationships. So your romantic relationships, your relationship with your parents, with your kids, your relationships at work, with your friends, making sure that you implement these ideas into all your relationships will be really, really powerful. And so I'm excited to share these actions with you today. But before that, we've all heard how many times communication is so important. Communication is so important. So why don't we do it? And probably because some of us, we just don't know how, right? We probably got a lot of our communication skills from our parents. And so if our parents weren't great communicators, then we weren't great communicators. Or if you had a partner that wasn't a great communicator, maybe it made it so you weren't a great communicator. Or if you've had a leader or a manager that didn't communicate well, right? It stops you sometimes from continuing to work on your communication skills. And so, when you do communicate, right, the why to communication is because when you communicate powerfully and effectively, it just makes your relationships better because people are actually understanding what you're thinking and what you're feeling. We so often will spend time making assumptions and taking things personally instead of asking the hard questions. And so we're going to dive into that. So the why around communication is it allows you to effectively share your feelings, opinions, and expectations with others. And that is just so valuable in any relationship. You have to be able to share effectively how you're feeling, your thoughts, and all of that good stuff. So let's talk about miscommunication. So miscommunication or lack of communication has a negative effect. It can negatively affect your mood. It can negatively affect your love for someone, right? When you're constantly having miscommunication, that can be pulling you away from somebody. That can be pushing you away from somebody if you're the one who isn't communicating effectively. And it can also cause you to have more stress in your life. And so something that happened just last night here at my house, I have a little boy, he's 4 years old. And I was eating dinner and he wanted my chapstick. I was like, okay, whatever. I was like, it's on my dresser, go grab it. And so he was watching a show in my room. And so when my husband was done eating dinner, he went into the room and he had the chapstick in his hand. And right, 4-year-olds, like the only focus they have is what's right in front of them. So he's watching TV. And so my husband walks in the room and he says, Lincoln, what do you have in your mouth? And Lincoln just lifts the chapstick up. And so Jake starts yelling at him, you better go tell your mom that you're eating her chapstick. And so he comes into the kitchen and is like so upset and is crying. And so I'm like, babe, come over here. And he had a Jolly Rancher in his mouth that he had found on top of my dresser. And so he's super emotional. He's upset. He's crying because it was a miscommunication. Like Jake made the assumption that Lincoln was eating chapstick. And so he yelled at him. And so Lincoln got super upset, super emotional and came in. And so I made sure he understood. I was like, babe, daddy didn't understand what you were saying. But right, then Jake feels bad and then Lincoln feels bad. And so when you have that miscommunication, everybody just feels bad. And so making sure that you are focused on being a good communicator will help you have better relationships, not just with, your partners, but with your kids, right? Like little kids, they need us to be that example of good communication so they can grow up to be good communicators. And so, after that whole thing happened, Jake was so good. He came in and he apologized to Lincoln and he held him and he hugged him and he said he was so sorry. And right, that's just another opportunity for us to learn that we need to be better communicators, and that our son is 4 years old and he is watching a TV show and he is not listening to what you're saying. So, right, it's just another opportunity to learn and work on our communication skills. But miscommunication can hurt our work relationships. I know that I had an experience when I was running a store in the past where I'm pretty direct. Like I'm not a gal that like fluffs things up and softens them. I'm pretty direct. And so as a leader, that's how I was with my people. And I remember I had this employee where she'd done something. I couldn't even remember what it was, but I remember I like went and I just gave her the feedback, and it was very direct. It wasn't soft. And she sat with this and stewed on it forever and ended up quitting, but never once told me that the way that I communicated to her made her feel bad. She never once even like had a follow-up conversation after that with me. So I didn't know that the way that I communicated upset her. And so she ended up leaving, right? Like that's how powerful miscommunication can be. Like she quit her job because I didn't communicate powerfully. And so I have spent years working on my communication skills because I know that when you don't communicate powerfully, how negative it can affect the world. And so, so let's talk about how awesome communication can be. What can it do for your relationship? So I'm just going to quickly share with you some of the reasons why working on your communication can impact your life in a powerful way. So if you have good communication, it helps to strengthen your relationships. And again, not just your relationships with your partners, but it can make you have better relationships with your kids and your friends and your coworkers and your leaders. And so powerful communication in all aspects of your life is so valuable. When you choose to communicate powerfully, it takes the guesswork out of relationships, right? How many of us have been in a relationship where we are making assumptions or guessing what the other person's thinking? And I know that we've all done this. We're like thinking like, oh, they must think this or they must think this. And we're just creating a story in our head that doesn't make it reality. Like if we just took the time to ask the questions, we would get clarity. When we communicate powerfully, it helps to avoid misunderstandings. Like last night with my son and my husband, there was a misunderstanding that blew up into this thing that it didn't need to be. When you communicate powerfully, it builds trust, right? When somebody can trust you. And I think that's not just like with the words, right? It's not just you speaking and communicating that way, but when you are actively listening to somebody to listen rather than just listening to respond, it builds that trust. And that is so valuable to build trust within your relationships, because if you don't have trust, you start moving away from people. It allows partners to support each other when you have good communication. And this one I think is really important, right? Because my husband a couple of weeks ago, he was telling me he works full time and then he takes care of me and our kid a lot. And he was telling me, he's like, I need some Jake time. I need some time by myself. And so he communicated that with me, that he needed time for himself. And so I made sure that on a Friday morning, Lincoln went over to grandma's and grandpa's after school, and I went and did my own thing. And he was able to go spend time by himself, going to a movie and just being alone and doing things for himself. And so when you are communicating with the people in your life, you are supporting them. And that's so powerful. So when you communicate powerfully, it helps you to grow love in your relationships. And then it's also great for your mood. I mean, I know for me that if I'm not communicating with somebody, say I have an argument with my husband and I don't communicate with him how I'm feeling, or he doesn't communicate how he's feeling, I feel like I'm walking on eggshells in my own home. And so it absolutely affects our mood when we do not focus on being powerful communicators. So that's really like how communication can really support your relationships. And it can also, so good communication for your relationships can also allow you to explain to someone else what you're experiencing and what your needs are. And so making sure that when you communicate your needs, that's really important, because people don't know what they don't know. And I think we make the assumption a lot that people can read our minds. And so when your husband or your friend or your mom doesn't do something for you, you start telling yourself this story, and it doesn't serve you and it doesn't serve them, because maybe now you have negative energy towards them, because instead of you saying like, these are my needs, you made the assumption that they already know, and people don't know what they don't know. They can't read your mind. So choosing to communicate powerfully can really help you build better relationships, because you're going to stop making assumptions. The effects of poor communication or lack of communication can be turning away from each other's attempt to connect, right? It can break that connection. It also makes people feel unseen or unknown, and lonely. And then it can also create lack of intimacy if you are not effectively communicating. And remember, communication is important in all of your relationships. I've shared a couple stories where communication has hurt my family or my job. And so taking the time to work on your communication is just absolutely powerful, and it's something that we all should be doing. And know that this is something you can learn, because I wasn't always a great communicator. This is definitely something I have had to put work into, because I would be that person that would make assumptions. I would create stories, and I would just assume that, this person could read my mind, or they know how they affected me, and people just don't know what they don't know. And so you have to let go of those assumptions and say what you need to say so people can understand. So, so I want to share with you some ways to communicate, and becoming a powerful communicator is so important. So the things that I'm going to share, and this is different. This isn't like something you can Google and say, okay, how to be a better communicator. That's not what I'm going to share with you today. But so if you know me, or if you've worked with me, you know that my favorite book is The 4 Agreements. And I have all of my clients read this book because I know it's so valuable. And so we're going to take those 4 agreements and we are going to apply them to communication. So the 4 agreements are: don't take anything personally, don't make assumptions, be impeccable with your word, and always do your best. And so today, that is what I'm going to share with you. I'm going to share with you how to use these 4 agreements to help you have better communication in all of your relationships, not just relationship with your partner, but every relationship. So we are going to dive into that. So the first one I want to talk about is don't take things personally. And right, like I've already said this is what we do. Is somebody says or does something and we take it personally and we make it about us, and we tell ourselves a story about it, and it doesn't serve you and it doesn't feel good. And so what that means by not taking things personally is that you need to start asking more questions. So if somebody says or does something that upsets you, rather than going down the spiral of taking it personally and, what does this mean? Let me give you an example. So say that you are up for a promotion at your job and you don't get it and you take it personally, and then it just affects your work in a negative way. Well, if you chose to not take it personally and go to your boss or whoever was, in charge of that promotion and say, hey, can you tell me why I was passed up for that promotion and what can I do better so I'm not passed up the next time? Like, that's going to feel a lot better than you taking it personally and then not doing anything about it. And so when it comes to not taking things personally, that means that you need to stop telling yourself stories, and you need to start asking questions like, why did this happen? Or what did you mean when you said this? Or even sharing, like, this is the action that you did and this is how it made me feel. Because a lot of times people don't know what they don't know, and it doesn't serve them. And so don't take things personally, because 100% of the time when people act a certain way to you or treat you a certain way, that is 100% about them and has nothing to do with you, right? People maybe respond and communicate because of the way that they were raised. And we all live in our own reality. We were all raised differently, and so we all communicate differently. And unless you make an effort to communicate, you said this to me and this is how it made me feel, then you're not going to move forward in that relationship. So that's the first thing. Don't take things personally. And then the next agreement is don't make assumptions. And I promise you, if you just choose this one to work on, then you will have better relationships, because we all make assumptions, right? Like, you can be walking down the street and some woman walks by you and she gives you the side eye, and guess what's the story? Oh, she doesn't like me. She must hate my hair. She must not like my clothes, right? You just go down the spiral of stories. And we do that within our relationships and within our communication. You get to work, your boss doesn't say hi to you. Oh, he must be mad at me. I didn't do this on time, so he must be pissed, right? But we make these assumptions, and these assumptions don't serve us. And when you choose to have those hard conversations, that's when the assumptions stop. And so whether it be in your personal relationship or your work relationship, you need to get really comfortable having hard conversations. And so I'll quickly share a story with you. I had a woman that I was working with. I met with her last week, and she was sharing with me that she's been married to her husband for 35 years, and they basically live in separate bedrooms and they don't talk. And so I told her, I was like, okay, well, the thing that I'm going to ask of you is to have this hard conversation. I want you to tell him these assumptions that you've been making about your relationship. I want you to tell him how you've been feeling. I want you to tell him everything that has pulled you away from being connected to him. And so she did it, which I was stoked about, right? When clients like do what I ask, I'm like, yes, like, please, what I'm offering you is valuable. Please take this action on. So I saw her yesterday, and she told me that she couldn't have the conversation. She's like, I just knew that if I got on the phone and I had this conversation with my husband, I would just cry. And so she said she wrote him a letter. She read the letter to me. And so in the letter, she shared with him, this is, we're not sleeping in the same room. I love you, but I don't like you right now. I don't know how we got here. And so she just wrote out this whole letter to him and sent it to him. And then he responded to her, and she shared that with me, is that he didn't know any of this. She was making the assumption, and it's been going on where they've been living in separate bedrooms and not having a good relationship for 5 years. For 5 years, she's been feeling this negative energy. She's been feeling like distant from her husband. And so she sent him the letter, and he sent her a letter back telling her, like, I didn't know any of this. I didn't know that you need me to acknowledge you. I didn't know that you need me to, have dinner with you. I didn't know any of this because I never said it. I just thought you were doing okay because you never said it. And talking with her last night, she was just so incredibly grateful that I had her do this one thing, because she's like, now I'm willing to have these hard conversations with my kids, because her kids are not grateful for her and they expect her to do all these things. And so now she's done the hard part, right? She did the first conversation, that first hard conversation. And now she can have those hard conversations with everyone else in her life. And so instead of making assumptions about people must know what I'm thinking, you need to start having those hard conversations. And when you do, it just makes all of your relationships better. And so I challenge you to stop making assumptions and start having hard conversations. So the next thing that I'm going to talk to you about is be impeccable with your word. So this is the next agreement from the 4 agreements. And this one is so valuable. So when I start working with women and they share with me that they're struggling in their marriage or they're struggling in their relationship, this is the one thing that I'm like, you have to start doing this with your husband. Because some of the women that I work with, they share with me, their husband, maybe they fight a lot, right? And so be impeccable with your word is so important. And it's something that you need to implement into all of your life. And so be impeccable with your word. What does that mean? That means that you are not being sarcastic. You are not being snarky. You're not teasing. You are speaking kind to yourself, and you are speaking kind to others. So be impeccable with your word means you are kind with the way that you speak to others. And so something that I do not tolerate in my family is teasing. We do not tease. I do not do sarcasm, because it's not valuable. And so I was raised in a pretty sarcastic family, and my sister is a very sarcastic person. And so it got to the point with her where she would make a sarcastic comment to me, and I wouldn't even respond. I wouldn't say anything. And she would be like, I'm just kidding. And I'm like, no, like, yes, you may say you're just kidding, but what you said is coming from a place of truth, and you're just being mean, because that sarcasm isn't coming from a place of kindness. And so be impeccable with your word is so important. I had a client that I was working with at the end of last year where her and her husband, they would fight and they would say very mean, unkind things. And I asked her, I'm like, I need you to implement this into your marriage, because if your children are seeing you speak to each other that way, then they are going to think that it is okay to speak to each other that way or speak to you that way. And so be impeccable with your word is so important. And that also means that you're not gossiping. You're not gossiping about other people. Like at the office, you're not like, oh, Susan did this. Did you hear? You are being impeccable with your word. And if you want to talk to Susan about what's going on, you go talk to Susan about what's going on. So being impeccable with your word is making sure that you're being clear about what you're saying. You're being kind about what you're saying. You're not being snarky. You're not being sarcastic, and you're not teasing, because snarky, sarcastic, and teasing is all coming from a place of unkindness. And being impeccable with your word means that you are choosing to be kind in the way that you speak to yourself and to others. And so this is so important. So I want you to start building awareness around the way you speak to others. Are you constantly making jokes and being sarcastic? Because that can hurt people's feelings, right? Like I know that as a kid, people in junior high school is like awful. I never wish that on anyone. But that's when people start being real snarky and sarcastic and teasing. And guess what? It hurts your feelings. Like that's where a lot of our trauma starts as kids, right? And where our limiting beliefs start, because people are mean to us. Our self-worth starts going away because of the way that we speak to each other. And so if you want to have more positivity, good energy in your world, in your life, you need to make sure that you are being impeccable with your words. So you need to speak to others with kindness. And that means you need to think before you speak. Don't just blurt it out. And here's something. So like if my husband, it was like my son's birthday. I remember it was like the morning of my son's birthday party. And I was like, I'm feeling stressed, I'm feeling overwhelmed. And he just made a small comment that like could have just been like nothing, but he's like, well, then let's just not do the party. Why are we doing this? And I just like would turn to him. I'm like, that is not helping. That doesn't help. That doesn't make me feel better. And so making sure that I'm calling him out when he's saying things like that, like that's me being impeccable with my word, because I'm not allowing it to happen. And then making him now think before he speaks is important. And so be impeccable with your word. It's super, super valuable. And then the last agreement is always do your best. And this one is valuable because there are going to be days where you're your best. You're feeling great. You got enough sleep and you can communicate beautifully. And there are going to be days where you're ornery and tired and you don't maybe communicate best. And so I want you to always do your best. So in any situation, whether it's at work, in your relationship with your partner or your kids or your parents, always do your best when communicating. And that means think before you speak. Listen, actively listen to what people are saying, so you are not just listening to respond, because that's what we do. We're always like, and don't interrupt. Like, oh my gosh, that is like something that I have had to learn. And I think it's made me be a really good communicator, is because I don't interrupt people. I wait for my turn to speak. Because when you're interrupting people, that's rude. Right? Where you're saying like, what I have to share is more important than what you're saying. And so always do your best. So making sure that you're actively listening, right? We all know that. And these are things that I don't have to tell you. You've heard these a million times. Actively listen, wait for your turn to speak, speak with kindness. And something that I always do is after I say something to maybe a client or to my husband or whoever, I ask like, does that make sense? Can I clarify for you? And when you are actively listening to somebody else, right, you are going to repeat what they said back to you and repeat it exactly how they said it, not the assumption that you made around it. Like, don't change it. Like, oh, well, this is what I heard. But even saying like, this is what I heard, right? Then you're going to get clarity, because somebody's going to say, well, no, actually I said this. So always do your best. So those are the 4 agreements. Be impeccable with your word. Always do your best. Don't take things personally, and don't make assumptions. And I promise you that if you choose to implement these 4 agreements into your relationships, you will have better communication and you will have better relationships. And I know for me, because I made an effort to practice these, I have a great relationship with my mom, and me and my mom struggled with our relationship for so long. because she would say something to me and I would make a snarky comment back to her, or I would make an assumption about what she said rather than asking the hard questions. I have a great relationship with my husband because we are committed to communication, and we use these for agreements in our relationship. We ask those hard questions, and where I look back at when we first started dating and we would get into an argument and it would take a while for us, like I would silent treatment him, right? Like I would be plotting where I was going to bury him in the backyard because I'd be so pissed off. And so we have been working on this for years, but now if we get in an argument where before I would silent treatment and then we would maybe fight for a day or two, like our turnaround time is 30 minutes. When we get in a fight, it is a 30-minute turnaround, and it's quick. He'll do something, like something happened even last week, and I don't even remember. I was upset, and he left. He went to go to the chiropractor, and then he came back, and he was like, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that. And because we've constantly been practicing better communication, like our turnaround is very quick when we get into arguments, and we just communicate powerfully with each other. And so I promise you that if you choose to put these 4 agreements into your relationships, especially your romantic relationships, like it will shift. And make these important in your work relationships. It's so valuable because, I know I was a leader and I didn't always communicate powerfully. And we make those assumptions that our parents are good communicators. We make the assumptions that our managers or our leaders are good communicators, and they're not. Like, people are human beings and we all make mistakes, and not all of us communicate well. And so I challenge you to try on these 4 agreements and implement them into your relationships because it can be so, so valuable. Thank you for being here. I am honored that you guys chose to take on this masterclass to improve your communication skills so you can have better relationships. Please leave any questions in the comments and I will respond to them. I love doing this. I love sharing this information. What I do in this group is I offer you free information because I know how valuable it can be when you choose to try these things on, and because it can transform your life. Like all of the things that I offer in this group, I've implemented into my life. And over the last 9 years, my life has gotten amazing. Like 9 years ago wasn't so great. Now, because I put in the work and everything I offer, I've done in this group. And so I challenge you to try these things on because it's so, so valuable. I have 5 spots left for my one-on-one coaching program for this month. So if you are ready to grow your communication skills better, if you are ready to grow your self-love and your self-worth, if you want to grow your confidence or even grow your business, then I'm your girl. Send me a DM with the word program and we'll get connected. But thank you so much for being you. Thank you for being a part of my community. And I look forward to connecting with all of you soon. Thanks so much.